Hi everyone, this is Brian again, licensed massage therapist at Rasa Spa in Ithaca, New York, talking about self-massage techniques for the hips and low back, two areas that cause a lot of pain for a lot of people because they are so connected and they are very mobile in terms of all the movements that are able to happen at those areas, and there's a lot of muscles in those areas that work really hard to keep us upright and move us throughout the world. So we're first going to talk about the hips. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our lacrosse ball and get into the glutes. Now most of us think about the glutes as the large gluteus maximus that's across the backside of the hip. But you should also think about gluteus medius and gluteus minimus, which live on the side of the hip here between the top of the hip and this bony prominence along the edge of the thigh here. So it's a spot that I really like to start when talking about working on the hip. So just placing the lacrosse ball on the floor, leaning into it with that soft area between those two bony prominences I just mentioned. And I like to lay all the way down because I find that it just allows me to relax completely into the work. I find that sometimes when I'm up here like this, I'm bracing against it a little bit, and it ends up being counterproductive to what I'm trying to accomplish. But certainly try a couple different variations out and see how it feels for you. And then it's an easy jumping off point for working, just shifting the hips over to the side, and then working on the main gluteus maximus along the backside of the hip. Same concept. Rolling back and forth. There's a lot of surface area there typically to be able to explore. So don't be shy and find a spot that feels particularly tender and work on that for a bit. You can also do a little bit, you can put your knee up like this and allow it to fall out to the side and then bring it back in towards center. And basically what we're doing there is we're doing external rotation of the hip and internal rotation of the hip. We're moving those muscles that are underneath where the lacrosse ball is there. And that's just providing a little bit of an extra, different kind of a stimulus to the muscles that we're trying to work on. We're essentially stretching the muscles underneath the pressure of the lacrosse ball. And I really like to always follow up work on the glutes with a nice hip stretch. You can do a very simple hip stretch seated, where you just cross your leg over your body. This is a great place to start for almost everyone. I do some more advanced stretching, and even this is really good for me. But I really like to do a lot of stretches that do more things, more than one thing at a time. So for that, I would look to something like a pigeon pose. For those of you who do yoga, you might be familiar with this. What we're looking at is this position here. I by no means have a perfect pigeon. We're not looking for a picture perfect pose, just something that's going to give us a nice productive stretch. So if you have a little bit of space underneath your hip here like I do, you might want to put a yoga block there or a pillow or something along those lines. And I like to start first up like this. I find that what happens is I'm getting two stretches at once. I'm stretching the back side of the hip here, but I'm also stretching the front of my hip on the other side. So I can kind of extend this knee, and that allows me to get a nice stretch across the other side. And if I want to focus in on this aspect of the hip, I'm just going to lean down like this, and I feel it more in that area. And then what I often also like to do when I'm in that area is I like to take my arm that's opposite to the hip that I'm working on and stretch it long. And then what I'm doing is, in addition to the stretch here and the stretch on the other side, I'm getting a stretch through my lats here, which can be really nice. So it's kind of like, ends up being a 3-in-1, which can be nice for those of us who might not have a ton of time to do stretching every day. So after doing that, we're going to do a little bit of work in the low back. So You can feel free to utilize your double lacrosse ball if you have it in this area. Just having this side on one side of the spine and this side on the other side of the spine, so that the bones along the back of your spine, which are called the spinous processes, lay in this area and aren't getting a ton of pressure. Really important, especially for those of us who have back issues, not to put a ton of pressure directly on the bones in the spine. So we're going to be working in the area that's below the bottom of the ribs here and above the top of the hip bone. So we're going to place the lacrosse ball right in that area and just lay back on it, very similar to the other techniques that we've done. I like to put the leg up of the side that I'm working on, just in this kind of cross-leg position. I find that it just gives me a little bit more balance and stability, and seems to allow my back to sink into the work even that much more. And so going this way along the spine, or along the muscles that are on either side of the spine, being careful not to do too much of this motion, because again, you don't want to cross over those bony areas of the spine themselves. Can cause you a little bit more harm than good if you do that. But I will go the other direction. I'm just going to let my hips fall to the side like this. And essentially what I'm doing here is, instead of coming directly back on the spine, I'm kind of coming at this angle. So I'm coming in from the side instead of the back. And that means you're not only getting the muscles called the erectors, which are the big ones on either side of the spine, but you're working a little bit of a muscle called quadratus lumborum, or QL, as it's sometimes abbreviated. It's a muscle that can be implicated in a lot of back and hip pain, so make sure that you don't leave QL out of the equation. And the last thing that we'll do, that we'll follow that up with, can certainly be a nice thing to just have a really simple forward fold, maybe grabbing the toes and just relaxing into it, making sure that we're not pulling so much that we're causing pain through the spine. But one advanced variation that I like to use to target the QL specifically is, I'll have my leg on the side that I want to work on, kind of in this position where it'd be crossed under me, almost like crisscrossed, and then taking my other leg, crossing it over, planting my foot on the floor here, and then because I'm working on this side, I'm going to plant this arm and lean into it like this. So I'm lengthening across this side, creating space between where the bottom of the rib and the top of the hip is. And if you need even more of a stretch after that point, you can grab your knee on the side that you're trying to work on and just give it a little pull up. You can twist a little bit back and forth if that feels okay for you. Obviously being mindful in any of these positions how your joints are feeling, both in your back but in your hip and even your knee as well, especially with that pigeon pose that I was showing you earlier. Very easy to injure your knee if you're not prepared and if you don't have the flexibility and the strength to get into that position. So start slowly, start with more simple variations of those stretches, like the basic hip stretch that I showed you first. And if that feels good, start to move slowly into the more advanced pigeon pose. Thanks again for joining us today on techniques for the low back and hip. Next week, we're going to be talking about techniques for the upper back and neck. In the meantime, please do follow us on Instagram at Rasa Spa and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.